Welcome all. Thank you for joining us for downtime. It's good to see you all. Good to see you, Lance. How you doing?
I'm surviving.
Sort
of.
So, you know what? I really friggin' had it with people sitting there going like, you guys are always late. So I figured if we go a half hour early, we just get to add up all of the like 5 minutes late. So we now have like, you know, if we're late 5 minutes every show, right. This time we're a half hour early. That's 6 shows. 25 minutes
in the bank now.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. Oh dear Lord. So, oh God, there's something with you military guys getting your asses handed to you by dentists. This is what I told Starsky. Yeah, So Starsky had like dental work. He blames. Actually, I think he blames 𝗲𝗲 for it. I think he was in 𝗲𝗲 before it got encircled. And he said the water there was absolutely terrible. Something about the water was terrible. He said it rotted out all his teeth. I think it was 𝗲𝗲. It may have been some other area. He said it rotted out all his teeth. So now he's getting all this dental surgery, and he's complaining about how much it hurt. It was just like, you know, he's had more injury caused him by dentists than by the Russian army. So we'll have to, you know, that's it. They have to just arm with dentists all at the front. Although it's possible. So I wanted to let you know, by the way, we're going to have to bust his balls about this. He has been promoted. He is now Captain Starsky.
Oh, he really did get promoted.
Yes, okay. He did. So I just heard about that yesterday. He was streaming and he mentioned it. Somebody asked during the stream, they're like, you know, oh, did you know, was there a ceremony? He's like, he was polite about it, but he's like, we're in the middle of a war. No, it's just, you know, you're now a captain. Congratulations. Go shoot something. Oh dear Lord!
Think of in the Navy, whenever we had a Marine captain around, you're one of our greatest assets, because we'll have you make the hard phone call, and you say, "This is Captain Smith," and everybody thinks you're the equivalent of a colonel, because captain in the Navy is an 06, like an Army colonel.
You and Xander are always talking in those like 04 or whatever, and I have no idea what those numbers are. I am such a civilian.
Well, 01 is a second lieutenant in the Army. In the Navy, it's an ensign, and then it goes all the way up through, you know, lieutenant, first lieutenant, and Lieutenant JG in the Navy. Then it gets weird, because you have in the Army, you have a captain. In the Navy, you have a lieutenant. And then you get, in the Army, you have a major, you have a lieutenant commander in the Navy, then you have a lieutenant colonel in the Army, and you have a commander in the Navy. That's where I was. And then in the Army, you get colonel, and in the Navy, you get captain. So there's this weird up-downy thing between the rank between the two services. So as we used to jokingly say, "Oh, he's a telephone captain."
Well, what was it? He said, now yeah. He said, "You can all call me Captain Obvious." I was just like, okay, yeah, I like
Captain
that.
Obvious.
Captain Obvious. Yeah, I was checking out his stream, and you know, he's making the rounds. I think I told you he was on CBS, which was delightful, and all that other good stuff. So we're gonna catch up with him tomorrow. I think that's gonna be good. I gotta tell you, I was a little nervous because his unit is being redeployed, and there's talk of him being moved to the front lines. I'm curious to know how realistic that is. We've talked about him, just in case people, and he had mentioned this on his stream. He's mentioned this on ours. He started on the front lines. He started on the front lines during the Revolution of Dignity. He did not expect to survive it, and he thought the Revolution of Dignity was going to fail. It succeeded. He's been on the front lines ever since then. Then somebody figured out, oh, that Poochie is not happy. That is not a happy Poochie. Yeah. And you know, there's a lot of footage of him running around, getting shot at, and shooting back at people. So he's been in the thick of it more than once. But they figured out that he's good at communication, and they also need PR. So you know, that's what he's been doing. But his unit is now has been renamed, and they've been sort of renaming units and reassigning them to specifically to go in and what is it? So my thing is up there. All right. Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you, Titan. Appreciated. So what they're going to be doing is specifically they're going to be given their job is, I guess, whether it's clearing, I don't know what it's called, but they go in and take very specific small positions and remove all the Russians that are in that position. Anyway, so that's it. So they're going to be redeploying his unit. So he's going to be finding out what's going on with him in the next couple of weeks, I think. So we'll all see.
Well, my understanding, and I'd have to get him to confirm this, but it's my understanding he was only an NCO in combat, and then he got promoted to officer slot and took up, support staff duties as an officer. So with a promotion to captain, I think it rather unlikely he would be assigned a frontline captain's position, would be command of a company, because he didn't have that intermediate step of being a platoon commander as a lieutenant at the front. So he'll probably be, on a staff somewhere, not in the rear per se, but not directly on the front line.
Yeah, so let's see. I had a couple of questions about that before Twitter. My advice on that before Musk got there was stay the fuck away from it. Now that Musk is there, get even further the fuck away from it.
Yeah.
And it's always been a cesspool, and people are always asking me, why is it such a cesspool? It's a cesspool because you can go on, you can be anonymous, and there's no repercussions, and then people very quickly realize that it's actually, unfortunately, just the nature of being human beings. It tends to be somewhat gratifying to talk down to people, condescend to people, and generally be an asshole. And since there are no consequences, that's what you find 50% of the people on Twitter doing. One of the reasons I used my real name on Twitter for two reasons. One was because, I knew I was going to use it to communicate and to talk about writing and all this other stuff. But two was, I figured it would help keep me in check and reduce my impulse to just say whatever the fuck I want. And I've noticed every now and then if I do get a sock account and start going around and just engaging people as an anonymous whatever, I'm more hostile. I was like, I don't like this version of me. So So there's since Musk has taken over, first of all, anti-LGBTQ has been going through the roof. People have been, whether there's more of them or just they've always been there, but now they feel like they can really talk and they have an ally in the CEO. It's gotten really bad for toxicity. And so I forget how I got dragged into this, but somebody started talking about Russia, Ukraine, all that other stuff. And it was, there were two guys, they weren't Russian. I think one was an American. I forget what the other one was, but they spoke English beautifully. Basically bought the whole, they're like, I think I told you at least part of this. They're like, no more than 10,000 have died 10,000 Russians have died in Ukraine. Ukrainians are suffering huge losses. I was like, well, wait a minute. Here's a map of where they were, 8 days into the campaign. They had basically encircled Kyiv. It was basically all over. Here's where they are now. What happened? They're like, oh, no, that was strategic. They wanted to take Bakhmut, so what they did was they pretended to go after Kyiv and then went after Bakhmut. Just like, wait a minute. They could have had that. It's just like, so they gave up the capital city, and these are not trolls. These guys believe it. Anyways, so then they start
this week at Home Depot on bullshit.
Yeah. Well, and then they start talking about how much they'd really like to help out Russia, and they had, I guess, apparently been thinking of going over there and volunteering. I was like, this can't be real. And then one of them says, well, I don't think it'll be too big a deal. I've been doing really good on Modern Warfare recently. And I was like, okay, this has to be a troll. But this is what Mars said. When we were talking with this exactly, it's like, well, you play World of Warships, so we're going to put you in charge of the Nimitz.
Meal Team 6.
And I mean, the guy really did the, he was just like, well, I've been playing a lot of Modern Warfare. I'm really been practicing, so I'm ready to go. And they would have completely lost me as they were just fake. I really don't. I've been looking at their account. I think it's straight up legit. And when we were talking with Mars, who's the guy who is the foreign volunteer in Ukraine, he's been coordinating. One of the things he said, we actually did 2 interviews with him, and the second one was the one that aired. The second one was very similar to the first, but, some questions had some nuanced differences in answers, and it was all basically the same thing, but there was a couple stories in the first that wasn't in the second, a couple stories in the second that weren't in the first, so on and so forth. But one of the things was, I had asked him in both of them, tell me about the kinds of people that show up, and he said, well, it's all kinds. You get people who aren't qualified. They know they're not qualified. They know they're probably going to die, but they've got this overwhelming urge to come and participate. And maybe it's because they have a shitty life or they want to prove something to somebody, but they're there and they're terrified and they know that they're out of their league, but they're there. Then there are the Rambos. They think they're just going to go up there with, a machine gun and take out 16 tanks. And then they're the ones who've been playing video games all their lives and think that this is exactly like that. And when you ask them what experience they have, they actually mention the video games. They said, if I was like, this is real? This is like, yes, because this happens. This is what it goes into. I don't judge. I do not judge any of them. They're there to help. We need all the help we can get, because they'll either learn or they'll go home, or they'll die, as the party didn't say. But he's trying to recruit people, so I guess he left that part out. Anyways, so they consider video games. He goes, yes, they've been playing, the video games where you go and you shoot other people, and they think it's going to be like that, and they think that's practice. And that was for the Ukrainians. That was for the Ukrainians seeing guys do that. So, and don't get me wrong. He also, there's a lot of, the other one, he said the biggest one that you see is people who have actually either been in combat and lost a war and feel like they need to redeem themselves and redeem the people that died in that war, or people who, once they've had that band of brothers, as you talked about, there's nothing else that compares to it, and they would rather be there, putting their lives in each other's hands and being there for other people in that way, despite the risk, than being at home. It's just that it's not the same thing, so that's why they're there. And yeah. It was a video game again. I literally saw this on Twitter. I was like, I think this guy's for real. I think he's going to go to Russia, and I was like, which to tell you the truth, right now, given how low they're scraping in that barrel, that might be a qualification. I was like, okay, how many hours have you had with Modern Warfare? Okay. 16, huh? You're in.
It's not how fast you can run the 440. It's how many hours have you had with Modern Warfare that decides whether or not you're going to be good at the front when you're that desperate.
Oh, dear Lord. Oh. So, and then all this China COVID stuff, which, we were talking backstage about it, and you brought up a good point, which is there are members of an administration who are always undermining that entire administration. I just think it's, to have the director of the FBI come out and throw one under the undercarriage of the Biden administration like that. That was shocking, and he has to know what he's doing. You don't go into Fox News by accident.
I think a lot of it is that they have to find something to create the churn, to get that sense of chaos that makes people question everything. And so you come up with these ridiculous lies, knowing that they're lies, but you don't care, as long as the gullible will go, oh yeah, could be that. Space aliens kidnapping our women, that kind of thing.
Oh, don't. Is Andrew was throwing that one out.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the point, is when you generate that kind of stuff, it attracts and enlivens a certain subset of the audience or the electorate, depending on what you're trying to appeal to. And I think that's the key, is to keep that base constantly energized and mobilized, because if you start letting that slip, they're going to begin to kind of have to think for themselves. And the moment that happens, they start realizing that you've been bullshitting them all along. So you just have to keep that cycle of greater and greater nonsense going to keep them preoccupied.
Is that just like 1984 kind of, like just keep them, we're always at war with somebody and, well, okay.
Oh, yeah. You have to keep that perpetual state of warfare between the three great superpowers going, because as long as they're focused on how much they hate those guys, they won't be focused on the fact that, no, most of the things that are wrong that are causing me to suffer and be miserable are generated internally here at home.
I mean, I've always sort of understood that in principle. It's just, you watch it and it's just sort of like, really, there's a better ways to move forward as a society.
Oh, I know. You look at it from the outside, you go, nobody could be that freaking gullible. But the truth is, yes, they are.
No, well, without it, we wouldn't have Twitter, but yeah.
Is groupthink. If your circle of friends believe one thing and are echoing that, you feel kind of compelled to echo those same sentiments. Because the moment you get out of step with them, you lose that support circle that you've had. And it feels frightening and dangerous to be cast adrift outside of that support circle.
Well, I think two people want to sort of be the head of that circle. So they go out and they look for, if they hear something that's just plausible enough that they think they can sell to it. Guess what I just discovered? Biden is secretly Obama, who is secretly, and it's all aliens or whatever. Yeah. And if they can sell that to the group, all of a sudden they become sort of the star of the group. So you have these people who are incentivized not to really check things, because as soon as they find something that's interesting and at least plausible, it just has to be plausible, then you just sell it as fact, and you reap the rewards.
Yeah, and I unintentionally kind of created a microcosm experimental version of that when I was in junior college. And as a joke, a couple of us told one of our friends in the group that some outlandish story about, the Germans were trying to encourage the South Africans to rebel against the British by transporting armored divisions under the sea with U-boats, and the only reason it failed is because a storm came up because there was a witch doctor in Brazil, and it just totally off the wall nonsense. And because three of us were telling him this story in different ways, he decided, it has to be true. None of my friends would lie to me and make a joke out of this. And you wouldn't believe the amount of work it took in, a couple months downstream when we're trying to convince him that, no, it was all a joke. We were just pulling your leg, dude. Oh, yeah. No, I read in some book somewhere, and it said, it's like, what book? We made all this crap up.
Oh, once he's that's...
You get so invested in a certain version of reality that you feel you can't allow something else to intrude on that imaginary version of reality, because then the underpinnings of so much else that's really important in your life falls apart. Oh, come on, puppy.
No, I'm rotating.
Come here, annoying dog. Come here. Show the audience your smiling face. There we go.
Oh. He's not pleased. Whatever it is, I didn't do it.
They're having disputes over who gets to be with mom and dad and who has to be in the isolated part of the house.
Oh.
I'm looking so forward to the day that these two can get along, and it's not one of you has to be in the ghetto.
It took us a while. We got a dog, and we already had two cats, and they can now be in the same room, but that took a year before they could be in the same room. So, yeah, absolutely. Oh, dear Lord, what was the other one? The other one, so in college, I did a similar thing. And I see, I thought that this is just because I thought I was clever. I had read James Randi, who is debunker, famous debunker, and had done some awesome. He would go on television, and somebody would claim to be psychic or be able to bend a spoon or whatever, and he'd debunk all of it. And he had written a one-page paper for essentially for pretending to be psychic. And what you would do is you'd go up to someone and say, "Oh, I'm psychic, and I can do a psychic." Oh, hello there. Hi there. You okay? Always face the camera. Always look at the audience. There you go. Oh, it's good. There you go.
No, he just wants daddy's attention.
Yeah, he's just like.
Well, because he knows the other dog is down the hall watching and going, "Oh, see."
Oh, he wants to prove.
Truly loved.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. So, anyways, it was this paper that you could basically read it to anybody and they'd think it was written for them. And it was all this like, you like being with people, except not too much. And if you have too much, you feel like you need to decompress and take some time to yourself. And it's like, well, that's the definition of too much. It's like everybody's that way. And it's just so he had written this thing, and I just sort of expanded off of it and read all this, how to be a psychic. And I think it was the second semester in my freshman year, I started telling people I was psychic, and I had a whole bunch of people convinced. And it was interesting. I had convinced my entire dorm, and I was having fun with it, and I saw it also as like this challenge, like, okay, it's like I got to do acting, I got to do theater, I have to do the writing bit too, because I have to be creative with the. I was having a good time till a guy came to me with some serious problems. He was just like, I need a psychic to tell me how to deal with this. I was like, whoa, okay, I am not your guy. I am totally not your guy. And I remember when I started telling people that I wasn't really psychic, I was all proud of myself because I had fooled everybody. And there was nobody who thought that, who wasn't dead convinced. And it's just one guy in particular. I just remember his face, this sort of dumbfounded look, and he doesn't know what to think. Just like, you're not psychic? No, there's no such thing as psychic. It's like, what the. And after that, it wasn't until next year that I could actually talk to any of them again. And it didn't cross my mind that people don't like being made a fool of. And I thought it was like this learning moment, right? I thought they were going, "Oh, wow, Nick." I was like, "Yeah, you see, we're all gullible, really. So let's talk about this." And I was like, "No, they're like, get the fuck away from me, man. Don't ever talk to me again." I was like, "Well, you didn't think that was cool?" No.
Yeah, nobody wants to be proven that they're as gullible as the next guy.
Yep. Never did that one again.
Probably a wise move.
Yeah, probably. So, I don't know. I think I saw Neil when I did my deconversion thing was talking about all the stuff I did in college. The other thing was, I was acting briefly. I enjoyed it. I liked it. I may have done more if and when, but I was in the next Karate Kid, the one with Hilary Swank. That was actually filmed at Brookline High in Massachusetts, just down the road from me, and got to do all these scenes. It was a lot of fun. But Jesus, where the hell was I going? Oh yeah. Well, no, okay. So, I almost got to wear the tights. So I tried out for one of the Batman ones, for Robin in the one that was opposite George Clooney. I tried out for that one. Got nowhere near anywhere with it. I mean, I didn't. I was just sort of like, yeah. But it was fun, and my friends were like, okay, so basically you're trying out for roles where you get to wear tights, or you get beat up by a girl, or they're like, we would like to. Is there something you're not telling us? It's like it's all a coincidence. But after the musicals
too, don't you, Nick?
Well, okay. Look, just because HMS Pinafore, it was handy. It came out, Gilbert and Sullivan. I don't know, men on boats, but
gotcha.
So, oh dear Lord, I am tired. I was telling you, I actually ended up being a good idea that we ended up moving up a half hour just because I'm tired anyway. So it's like, oh well, we'll do an hour show. But what was the
Punch
No, it wasn't trying out for. I had just finished the next Karate Kid, and I was a cast member. And I got a call from a friend who had gotten just an extra part in Blown Away. It was Jeff Bridges. They were shooting a scene at MIT. I live in Massachusetts, so it's just right there. There's a go, and I was just like, "Excuse me, what? An extra? I was a cast member in a Karate Kid movie. Who do you think you're talking to? That's probably not even." I was like, "At SAG wages, that's what, $50 a day?" Like, I don't think so. It was like Jeff Bridges, and it was like, so that that wrapped up. 6 weeks later, I got another call. It was a really independent, and I mean really independent film. It was a lady with a video camera. The battery had died on it, so she had to keep it plugged in the whole time. And I don't know what she was. It was either Jehovah's Witness or something, but she was doing a recreation of like the fall of whatever, and she wanted me to be some demon Beelzebub, and then she didn't like how I was doing it, so she's like, "Okay, what you need to be doing all this snorting. If you want to drool a little bit, that'll help too."
You didn't even need makeup for the part.
You know what? Okay. If I fix this thing where it'll mute you if I put the shield down, I don't think every time I do it. Okay, so I'm gonna put your shield down. Hold on, I'm gonna do this, and fuck it, it's still wired that way. What the hell? Okay. All the buttons. Somebody has come into this thing, and all of the buttons, there's like 7 cams here. I hit the button, and the shield is supposed to come down. Every single one of them goes to me. Either my wife, one of my kids, I don't know. They think it's funny. My eldest is just like, "We're gonna."
Wired it all.
Yeah. So I walked away from that part, and it was funny too because the lady, oh god, she lived in like the most dilapidated, just sort of like right next to all these abandoned houses, and it was a sketchy area. And she called her production company Poverty Productions, but she had spelled it in some clever way, and Pavarotti. I don't know. It was, and so I leave, and I'm just like, "Can I be an extra in Blown Away now, please, somebody?" Oh, yeah. It's just a little weird looking back on that. So we've got the movie, and every now and then my girls are like, and I actually couldn't find myself in most of the scenes. I was just, it's my wife who can find me. She goes, "Oh, there he is. She's like, "Oh, well, yeah, there we are." It was a hell of a lot of fun. I gotta say this. My father used to always say that the time he hated most was high school. And the reason was because everyone tells you what to do, and then, you get to college and you're free and you can sort of do your own stuff, and you just get more and more freedom since then. And at first I sort of thought maybe he was right. I didn't like high school. I didn't really get along with anybody, but holy shit. I had a girlfriend for about 5 years. We really cared about each other. It was a really great relationship. We didn't have to pay rent. We didn't have to worry about food. Her parents would like go on vacation for like weeks on end, and we'd have our house to ourselves, and it's like we didn't have to go anywhere, do anything, be responsible for anything. I was like, no, I want to go back to that time. I was like, what the fuck? It's like, yeah, I'll go back then.
It's interesting how many people say that high school was their favorite time of their lives. How much they liked it. And to me, it was like, I couldn't wait for it to be over, because I was so completely out of any of the social circles. I mean, I'd have 1 or 2 friends, and that was it. Everybody else was like complete social pariah, is how I was treated. So yeah, I was glad when that was over.
Yeah. I meet more people that say that than not. I certainly wasn't the most popular kid in school. I didn't have a lot of friends, but nobody bothered me. I think that's what I liked. Nobody bothered me. Nobody was interested in anything I had to say or do. I did not find school challenging. I hated homework, hated anything that you had to do outside of school. I was like, I'm going to do my time in school. I'll do well while I'm there. And then when the 2 o'clock comes around and you're out, I was like, I ain't doing shit. I'm not going to do homework. I'm not going to. So I managed to do well enough on tests and everything else. I got away with it. My grades weren't stellar, but it wasn't, So that's it. I don't know. It's just ever since then, it's like, okay, this adulting thing is just definitely not for me. Yeah. So we had a question, I had missed it earlier, but Titan asked, we were talking about games and as prerequisites for combat positions in an army, and he wanted to know what would years of playing online poker qualify him for? Now, if we're talking the Russian army, I assume commander.
Probably like platoon sergeants. So you could just take all the money from all the guys assigned to your command. And, since you'd be the one able to deal the deck, and you'd also get to, shuffle the deck however you felt was appropriate, you'd be quite good at poker by the time your time was done in service, and have amassed a nice fortune. So that works. I don't see that it works with commanders that much because poker requires a fair amount of ability to do statistical analysis. What are my chances of drawing this card as opposed to this card? Also to be able to read people, and that doesn't seem to be something that the Russian High Command does very well, either of those things. So, just personal opinion here.
So, I was listening to Starsky, and I've heard a few people, Ukrainians, who say Bakhmut is not going to fall under any set of circumstances. And I'm looking at it, and I don't think Bakhmut is going to hold under any set of circumstances. And it's not because of any lacking in the Ukrainian army. It's because the Russians are willing to do anything to take it, and they're taking the heaviest losses they've ever had, and they don't care. They will throw everything they've got at it, and nobody can withstand that. Nobody. So, any chance that Bakhmut is not going to fall, in your view?
Hang on. What's this?
Jupiter and Venus.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
My wife is showing me a picture of outside where Jupiter and Venus are directly in line.
It's clear.
Is Bakhmut going to fall? That's a good question. I think it mostly hinges on how heavily the Russians are willing to pay for it, and B, how heavily the Ukrainians are willing to pay to continue to hold it. Thus far, I would say the Ukrainians have shown they're intelligent enough to realize that some fights can't be won and that you can extract yourself from it and use those personnel and equipment to better effect elsewhere. I'm hoping that they haven't lost track of that ability to sense what's important and what isn't, and not commit to a symbolic victory, albeit a very, very costly one. Last time I looked at one of the situational maps, it looks like the Ukrainians still have a way to extract their forces from Bakhmut, so they could do so. Conversely, if the Ukrainians have moved reserves into a position, they could stage a counterattack and really do the Russians some very, very serious damage. But we haven't seen anything yet that suggests that's what's going on, but it could be. The Ukrainians have been, I think, quite capable about practicing good operational security in terms of not revealing what their intentions are, what they're getting ready to do. It could be. I'm hoping for the sake of the people in Bakhmut. It could be that the Ukrainian High Command has simply decided, we're going to burn you guys in order to continue to attrite the Russians to set something up for later in the spring when we do launch a major offensive. That would be unfortunate, but that's a reality in the calculus of war, that you make those decisions on. It may be callous to say it, but you guys get to die so that we get to succeed over here later. And
Yeah.
I think that's a possibility that's going on here as well. So I can't really say what's going to happen there. It's too up in the air.
Now, I remember early on, if I recall correctly, you had said, once this thing, gets rolling, keep an eye on what China's going to do, because they're actually going to be a major player in this. They could try to, recapture territories that currently Russia holds. Russia isn't going to be able to stop them. They could try to find a way to leverage this to get in nice with the U.S. or to get in nice with Russia, and they really get to choose. So, I had some warning that they were going to get involved, but coming up with a peace plan was not what I was expecting. Now, you did a great analysis of that peace plan. It's on our Discord. You go by it point by point and say, okay, this is why it looks reasonable, and in fact it is, and this is why this looks reasonable, and in fact, oh boy, it's not even close, and here's all the problems with it. I thought you did a great job of breaking that down. It did seem also, though, that certainly if I was a Russian, aside from the fact that Putin can't accept it because he's in for a penny, in for a pound. He can't back out that way now. He's dead if he does. But that aside, there were a number of what appear to be landmines for Russia as well, not just for the Ukrainians, but for Russia, where it's sort of like they can't agree to at least if the investigations into war, humanitarian aid and trying to stop the humanitarian crisis, if they're serious about that, that's going to implicate Russia a lot more than Ukraine. And they're like, yeah. So how much do they trust China? That's a good question. But what is China thinking here? Because it did seem to me that this was not just, this was it felt like a booby trap for Ukraine, but it didn't seem that much safer for Russia either.
The key thing to understand is that if China made a test float of this proposal, it's because doing so served some Chinese purpose. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. It's not being done because they care about the tragedy of all these people dying in a war. It's because something in that process of making that proposal works to their benefit. And in some ways, this is a win-win proposition for them. If it gets accepted by one side or the other, then they get to, kind of go, oh, look at us. We've taken over the mantle of world peace provider from the United States. We are the great nation of peace for the world now.
Mm-hmm.
So they win that way. If it doesn't get accepted by anybody, they still win because they made that proposal. They come off smelling like roses. We tried to broker a peace arrangement between this terrible war between the Ukrainians and the Russians, and unfortunately the two sides are just so entrenched in their positions it didn't work. But we tried. We're good, honest brokers. So it's a PR win. It's a diplomatic win for them, regardless of what happens going forward. That, I think, is the primary impetus of why they made that 12-point proposal. As you note, going through that proposal, I think there's a lot of stuff in there that if you read between the lines, it's really kind of setting the stage for, assuming anything moves forward, then China can make those claims on their own to justify some of their own actions. In other words, there's one that's, don't mess with the sovereignty of a nation dealing with stuff inside its own borders. Okay, if we buy into that Chinese proposal because it ends the war with Ukraine and Russians, then it's justification for the Chinese to continue their ethnic cleansing of the Uyghur and Tibetan people.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of several. There are lots of little landmine tidbits sprinkled into the 12 points that are like that, where if you buy the logic, then it allows the Chinese to say, well, because it was good over here, why isn't it applying to us over here? You know, now we're being victimized.
Yep.
Yeah, I say, it reeks to me, the whole thing.
Well, and you had pointed out, do I have it handy? If I have it handy, I may show it. I do want to save some of this for when we have Starsky on. I'm sure he has a lot to say about it. So tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern, we have more to talk about on some weeks than others in terms of the fighting and the war itself. I think Bakhmut is what most people are going to be talking about. But this proposal is actually huge. Just the fact that it dropped, just the fact that China just suddenly entered in a very big way, and not necessarily entirely on the side of Russia. So there's going to be a lot to talk about. But one of the things that you had pointed out was, and I do think I have it. Let me just check this out. This is it. So could you tell me your view on the demilitarized zone here, which if you take a look, the Russian... Yes.
So I will start by saying I have seen nothing that actually connects this proposal with the Chinese 12-point plan. There have been some people that have suggested this may have been attached to it, but there's nothing that I've seen that definitively says that. So let's start with two things. Number one, Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea and the still occupied portions of the southern oblast of Kherson. All of those are, according to this map, officially part of the Russian Federation and therefore are not subject to discussion. They are owned by and will always be owned by and are ceded to in perpetuity to the Russians. That's number one giveaway of how full of crap this map is. And the second thing is to look at the demilitarized zone and notice that the border is literally right next to, across the river from the capital of Ukraine.
In fact, I did notice that.
It's like there's something going on. It's like, well, we don't want you to be able to stop us advancing through the demilitarized zone so we can get real close to the capital to take it next time we try one of these little things.
Well, now, wait a minute. Wait a minute, though. If Russia signs on to this, and if Vladimir Putin himself signs a peace deal saying that they will honor this and never cross the river, is there any reason to believe that they wouldn't honor? Sorry, I'm trying to finish this as okay. Hold on, it's acting time. Hold on.
Be careful you don't rupture yourself holding those laughs inside.
Okay. I'm trying. Well, the good thing is nobody can see me right now. Sir, is there any reason to think that Russia would not honor its commitments to Ukraine and would actually, say, invade?
Well, let's ask it from the other perspective. Is there any reason for anybody to think that Russia would actually honor this commitment?
Well, other than every commitment that they haven't broken any commitments except for the ones that they've signed.
True.
To be fair.
Got to give them credit there.
Yeah. Listen, they haven't broken any commitments since the last time. Well, and that's one of the ones.
This all goes right back around full circle to what I've been saying all along, is that the war is not going to be decided on the battlefield in Ukraine. The war is going to be decided by what happens inside the Kremlin. Whoever comes to power after Putin will be the one who decides whether or not they continue fighting or not, and also puts in place whatever procedures are necessary to guarantee that peace will last, as opposed to be we're calling this one off this time, but 10 years hence we're going to start another one. That's what will decide the outcome of this. And I don't know what else to say. It's kind of a sad and tragic situation that I think the Ukrainians are going to be facing this again, unless either there's a fundamental change in the way Russian politics is run, or they get into a robust collective security arrangement with other nations that will help protect them in the event of a second Russian attack.
Well, that was very little that Starsky has told me has been surprising. As you know, I've spent a lot of time studying Russia, a reasonable student of history. There's very little that he had to say that I found surprising. One that nearly floored me, and I knew he meant it when he said it. I was just like, holy shit. We asked something along the lines of, did he ever think that Russia was going to invade? And he kind of looks at us like we had two heads, and he's like, well, of course they were going to invade. I knew from a child that we were going to have to fight this war. This war was inevitable to him from the day he knew what war was. This was going to happen. There was zero doubt in his mind. That was startling. And that wasn't anger. That was, I mean, because I could tell, because his first reaction was shocked that he was being asked a question. He's like, "What, are you kidding?"
It's kind of, if you take the similar question of, was the American Civil War inevitable? And it's kind of the same situation. People didn't want it to happen, but if you understood the politics that were going on and everything that flowed from that, it was an inevitable occurrence. The only question is when it was going to happen.
So
the property classes in the South were never going to let their property go without a fight.
So Putin's speechwriter bailed on him and was saying, well, yeah, the generals are getting pretty close to assassinating him. And you always have to be a little careful with a statement like that, because if it's true, he's the kind of guy who would have been maybe very much in the know, and so he'd be the kind of guy who could tell us. But he knows that. And if it's not true, he's got every incentive to lie, because here, we'll give you a cushy apartment in New York, and we'll give you a little money. Why don't you tell us everything that's going on with Putin? They're like, have I got some stories for you on Putin? So there's no way to know if there's any truth whatsoever when he says something like that. We hope it's true, but who knows? So just because he's Putin's former speechwriter, we've got no idea. And again, he's part of this system of just lie about everything all the time. So even if he knew, I'm not sure he'd tell us the truth. And not for the sake of bullshitting or loyalty, but just because it's not really in their nature, in my experience, to tell the truth. They're very suspicious of the truth and they don't like it.
Yeah. I'll say this. We know from a couple of sources who were fairly in on the circles inside Moscow that there is a lot of unhappiness within the Russian military with the way Putin has run things and how he's been, since very early on in the conflict, kind of using them as his whipping boy. Rather than accepting responsibility for the problems, he's been pointing at them saying, if it wasn't for them, we'd already have won, kind of thing. And the further down that road he's willing to go, the greater the alienation that's going to be generated inside the higher command levels in the Russian military.
Mm-hmm.
So it would not surprise me in the least if there's some sort of planning and plotting going on. The only thing that bothers me about that is I wouldn't think that the Russian military would initiate a coup on their own. I think they would want to have some sort of political top cover of somebody who's going to stand up and take responsibility and run the country in their place. I don't think they're entirely comfortable with becoming the government per se in their own right. So that may be one of the things that's kind of stopped a coup from happening, is that there hasn't been a person that's either actively gone out to recruit them as supporters, or who has gotten enough notoriety, enough tension or whatever for them to say, yeah, we'll back this guy.
Oh, this is something you would know far better than I. Just from a cursory level, from what I've seen, usually there's some kind of puppet or somebody who's standing in. Every now and then it's the general who's in charge, but it seems like they do try to avoid that. How often in any kind of coup where the military is involved, how often is it that the military itself takes over, and how often is it that the military is just sort of either has a political foil who's sort of running things, or is doing it at the behest of a political who's somehow insinuated himself into the military?
I think it depends on the country and, for lack of a better way of saying it, the traditions of that country. So in Central America, and to some large extent South America as well, the people who are the senior officers in the military, and we know from the old Banana Republic concept that it's not unusual for the military to actually take over and run the government for substantial periods of time. That's because the military officers often come from very highly placed, politically connected families. So they feel a natural affinity for that environment, if you will. Mm-hmm. Then you take a country like, say, Turkey, where there's actually, I don't know if it's still there, but at least it used to be, it's actually codified into the constitution that the army is the protector of the Turkish nation, and if the army feels that there is a threat posed by the political government, that they are required to overthrow that government. And that happened several times in Turkish history, and the military governs the country for a fairly brief period of time and then turns the government back over to the civilian side to run it. That's the way their tradition goes. In our country, it's just the opposite. The military is completely divorced from the political side of things, or was supposed to be. And it's to the extent that I knew when I was in service, numerous officers who didn't cast ballots and didn't feel comfortable doing so while they were still on active duty, because they felt that was kind of violating that military doesn't involve itself with politics side of things. So for Russia, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I can't think of any time when the military in Russia has really risen up and tried to take control of the political side of things. They usually have some sort of they have a connection with the political side that tries to do that. So when you get the Decembrists, they had various members of the nobility and aristocracy, princes of the royal household, who were encouraging them to try to overthrow the government and change things and get new laws enacted. You have a similar thing during the early part of the Russian Revolution in World War I, before the Bolsheviks take power, where military officers are thinking of marching on Petrograd and seizing the government for themselves because they don't like the civilian government that's replaced the Tsar. But nobody wants to back them, and their army basically falls apart as they're trying to march on the capital, because the soldiers just, that's not what we do. You're not supposed to be becoming the new government. So that's why I think if we're going to follow that line of tradition, so to speak, you're going to get a Russian hierarchy that's going to decide that we can get the military to work for us, rather than the military doing it the other way, which is saying we will co-opt a civilian to become our front man.
Well, if they decide that if the Russian oligarchs decide that they do want the military to overthrow Putin for them, I hear the best place to advertise for that is on LinkedIn. And what makes that funny is it's not a fucking joke. Well, now you remember
really?
Yeah, dear Lord. I want to know if I'm not convinced they took that down yet. Even a month later, 30 days later, that was still up. Like, this is a bounty, wanted dead or alive on LinkedIn for okay. I mean, it's there. It's a private enterprise. I suppose they can do whatever they want. So we've got a question from Titan. I'm not entirely sure I understand it. It may just be me. I think I'm just not understanding the context of which military or militaries in general. But the question is as follows. Could you give us more insight into the military mindset? Is it just as it seems the military higher-ups have fewer resources left in reserve to utilize at need? Now, I'm not sure if he's talking specifically the mindset or of a specific, so if he wants to expand on that for us, it sounds like an interesting question, but I didn't get the context.
Let's assume from the start, unless he corrects us, that he's referring to the Russian military, because the way the question as written right now is so generic it can apply to any military. In Russia, I think the part of the issue is that a large portion of what's left of the Russian military is either at the front or in critical, can't move them away from the border regions for security purposes, positions. So in the event of a coup, the military probably doesn't have a whole lot of assets that can be brought to bear inside Russia. That, I think, is a fair guess. That doesn't mean there aren't a lot of troops that are, back in training commands or what have you, but you end up with the same situation of, what equipment do they have, and if they're not trained well enough, how can you rely on them to do anything against MVD troops who are trained and equipped to deal with internal insurrection of that nature? So that may be part of what's limiting them. And I think another part of what's going on is that nobody wants to be the guy to jump first, because there's a lot of apprehension that if you jump first, everybody else is going to say, oh no, I was totally loyal to you, Mr. Putin, all along. Let me help you get rid of this troublemaker, so that you can rise on your own in the good graces of the existing leadership. So you have to wait until you've got enough collective resentment towards the regime that you all tacitly agree with one another, and that you can rely on one another not to change sides in the midst of the coup. And I think that's part of what's at play right now, is nobody's sure where everybody stands in all this.
Well, I assume too. I mean, you can't guard all the windows and all the doors at the same time. So what you do is you say the first one through dies, and that slows down everybody's. If they don't find a way to do it collectively, anybody who decides they're strong enough to try to be the first one to try it is going to die. So none of them really want to. None of them want to be the first one to make the move, because that's the guy who's going to take the brunt of it. And even if it succeeds, you're not going to be around to.
And I can't remember the year it went down. It's fairly recent. In Turkish, the most recent coup that was supposedly going to overthrow Erdogan. Increasingly, the information that has come out since then suggests that Erdogan actually orchestrated the coup against himself, so as to uncover all the people who didn't like him, so he could eliminate them.
I hadn't. That's Kim Jong-un level shit. I hadn't heard that one.
So yeah, and immediately after that coup, it's like 75% of the senior leadership in the entire Turkish military were retired. So, all right. And I don't mean, when I do the air quotes thing, I don't think, I'm not trying to imply they were shot, but it was like they were encouraged to leave the service for their own health. And they did, and they were all replaced with much more loyal, pro-Erdogan people. And you can do that because you've now, I have potentially damning information that suggests that this major who was actually leading the troops had talked to you about his intent, and you didn't tell me about it. Therefore, you're on the hook for treason, but I'll allow you to retire if you don't say anything and just quietly leave. And you see where I'm going with all that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, retirement, I have to believe, would be preferable because there are a lot of open windows in Turkey. But please continue.
Well, certainly a lot of open windows in Russia, and that's part of what's at play here.
Oh, all right. So Titan had followed up. Is that part of why the military is unhappy with Putin's sort of a lack of resources, the military? Now that begs an interesting question. So we talked about the Potemkin village, the concept of having a moving village to show the Tsar how awesome things are, but it's really the same people, same village. They're just moving it as the Tsar is coming through. Putin presumably is blaming the military, saying they didn't give me an accurate assessment of what they can do. They feel like they're not getting proper resources from Putin. Is that what's fostering the resentment, or?
In part. One of the more interesting terms that I've heard bandied about in the past couple of months is Potemkin military, to describe the Russian military, which is that you design this marvelous new airplane, tank, ship, missile, what have you, and you showcase it to the world of, look at these great things we've got. Nobody can beat us. This is better than anything the West has. And then you quietly scale back we're going to have 10,000 of these new tanks. And then when you pull the thread a couple months later, it turns out that they're only going to produce like 50 of them because they can't afford anymore. And it was always intended just as a showpiece of, ooh, look at this great thing. And it has teething troubles, which is why they haven't been committed to the war yet, and all that kind of stuff. So that, I'm sure, figures into part of the resentment that the military feels towards Putin, because they kept developing all these fancy new toys rather than keeping the existing toys modernized and functional and well-maintained and well-supplied, because it suited the propagandists' purposes better to just make new toys, but not have any of them. Right. The other side of it is that Putin, to some extent directly, but mostly indirectly, through his proxies, like Kadyrov and Prigozhin and such, has been pointing the finger very explicitly and saying, as I mentioned before, we would have won for now if it weren't for you corrupt, lazy, stupid, incompetent generals. And I don't think you can legitimately say something like that. There's some truth to it, don't get me wrong, but how many of the Russian generals have been killed because they're at the front, leading their troops from the front to try to get things unscrewed, to make it work? And he's trying to brand them as cowards and all the rest of this stuff. And so that's building up a resentment amongst the military, who definitely have a proud tradition going back, to the times of Peter the Great, about the great Russian military and everything it did to preserve the country against all these external foes, etc., etc. And here this pissant spy, who happens to now be the leader, is urinating all over those traditions and that glorious history of the Russian military. So they're pissed on that account too. And you add those two together, and yeah, you can easily see how there could be a lot of anger and resentment.
You had talked about a lot of the more modern tanks, and obviously a lot of the older ones that had been left to rot, so they haven't been taken out. You need to keep these things moving. You need to keep them in use. You need to even just I forget. We had Dorito come on and talk to us a little bit about the what kind of maintenance you need to prevent dry rot in the tires and to keep the gaskets going and all these. I mean, they need to actually be used to some extent. Instead of that, he put so many of these in fields with no covering, no nothing, so that now the tracks have become one solid piece of metal. They've just rusted together. You had mentioned this once before about how...
I was going to say, it's actually a two-part equation there.
Mm-hmm.
Part one is that because they didn't spend a lot on maintenance upkeep on their equipment, the idea was when it comes off the factory floor, we put it into storage so that when war breaks out, it's available for immediate use, and it will still be in allegedly prime condition to send to the front. And all your training is done on very limited sets of training equipment, which everybody shares. So today, the 1st Battalion gets to play on the tanks. Tomorrow, 2nd Battalion gets to play on the tanks. The next day, 3rd Battalion, you see, and you rotate it through like that. And that set of tanks gets constantly maintained and gets used and fixed as necessary. So you have a full training set. But all the other tanks for this division, they're in storage. They haven't been driven probably in years. And then you compound that with the second part of this equation for stupidity, which is that as the tanks get older and get replaced with new ones, you take them and you put them in these giant, open air storage lots, and you just leave them there in perpetuity. They're getting rained on. They're exposed to the rain, the sun, everything. Nobody's turning the engines over. Nobody's changing the oil. There probably isn't even cosmoline in the gun barrels to prevent corrosion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when push comes to shove and you try to bring these things out of retirement to use, as they're doing with the T-62s right now, none of it works. And you literally have to send it back to the factory to get it repaired so it'll run. It's not really updated or modernized. It's just, it's the same thing that they've just taken up time, which could have been used if you had the parts to build a brand new, much more modern tank. But you can't do that because sanctions have denied you access to those special components. So instead, you're effectively building a new or rebuilding an obsolescent vehicle for frontline service.
But the notion of the Potemkin village is essentially corruption and criminal mismanagement. I mean, finding ways to pocket the money instead of building the village, and then they have to just fake it the whole way through. What you're talking about sounds more like just either incompetence or not really understanding how to maintain these vehicles. What was there a lot of? I mean, from what I know of, there's corruption everywhere.
Yeah,
was
absolutely.
corruption a
there
big?
was a lot of corruption. One of the giveaways is you look at a lot of the T-72s that were destroyed in early fighting. And for those who don't know, when you look at T-72s, you see all these little small boxes lining the outsides of the turrets and along the hull, the sides of the tank. Those are reactive armor. So when a shell comes in, there's a block of explosive that explodes and pushes the shell away, basically. That's a gross oversimplification, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
And what they found was most of these explosive reactive armor blocks didn't have explosives in them. They had cardboard in them.
Cardboard doesn't strike me as a particularly effective combustion
defense.
Yeah. I mean. Okay. Now, admittedly, I'm still learning. Can you deflect a howitzer with cardboard?
With enough cardboard, yes.
With enough cardboard,
it would. Several city blocks,
6 miles thick. Yeah, sure. That is the perfect answer.
But the key here is that at some point, those explosive reactive armor blocks actually had explosives in them. So what happened to that explosive? And the simple answer is that whoever was in charge of that stockpile of vehicles, nobody's going to notice if, a couple of the blocks have been replaced with cardboard. And then next month you got to buy another Ferrari, and it's like, well, nobody's going to notice if all of the explosive barks have been replaced with cardboard, because nobody's ever going to use these in combat, and it goes on from there.
Oh, I got to give this quote. So this is Titan again. It's a quote, we've been trying to reach you about your tank's extended warranty. Oh, dear Lord. Oh. So, I want to start to wrap this up. I know, you have a time limit, so we start early. We still got a full show, so that's good. Are you still planning on joining us tomorrow with Operator Starsky?
I will be there, but I'm going to have to leave earlier than usual.
All right.
So either we'll wrap the show up early, or it's going to be you and Starsky on alone for the second half, so to speak.
That's a piece. I'll make sure. That's good to know. I'll make sure that we'll toss it to you early on. Like I said, I'm gonna definitely want to talk about the China thing.
Yeah, and if you listen real carefully, you might be able to hear me screaming as the dentist does his thing.
Yeah, I know. You were preparing for the dentist, and I was just like, ooh. This could be an interesting downtime. We could have McMillan on. We're like, what meds have you had, sir? Well, it's no. Be like, this is just the you're saying usual. I haven't gotten you to say anything really crazy yet. Nothing like nothing that might get me a cease and desist letter from
hippos.
Yeah, well, the hippos are something that might get me a cease and desist letter from Elon Muscovite there. Yeah, because he's not going to mind those kinds of comments. That's why what Xandring doesn't know is the show is technically in his name. Right, so we got one more question. Let me hit this one, and I think we'll wrap it up. Oh dear. I may not be asking that question in perpetuity. I think I'll stay away from that one. That's a trigger. That's a trigger. I'm triggered. All right.
Now all curious.
Oh no, it's an inside joke in a community, and you had it's a very long story, but there was the words in perpetuity it can be a trigger in some communities in this area. So I think just when you had said that, it was some people have just been riffing off on it. Long story. Anyways, the dentists are having their way now. So all right, well, it was really good. I'm glad that you were able to come on. We also did a show earlier today with 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐷 on the COVID stuff, which I'm really glad that we were able to get that out of the way. I have no illusions about the fact that we haven't really silenced the furor over this, but it's nice to have a position from someone who knows what he's talking about and get that down. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and just let me know if and when you have a hard stop time for tomorrow, and we'll make sure that we get you through first and get some of those questions through first. Thank you very much, and good luck tomorrow. Good.
Thank you.
I think before we got my grandfather was a surgeon, combat surgeon, actually in Patton's Army, but he was also practiced medicine all his life, and he said he really liked how the human body had been designed, with one exception. Had no idea why there were nerves and teeth, and so it was absolutely it was
proof, I would agree with that.
Proof that nothing designed the human body was that we have nerves and teeth. And he's like, if he had his way, when children were born, first thing you do is take out the tonsils, kill the roots and all the teeth. Done. It's just like the some of them. Someone was like, whoa! He's like, yeah. He did not like it. He was not pleased. All right. So good luck. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all in the live chat for being here. If you've liked the show, please like, subscribe, and share with anyone that you think would enjoy it. It's good for them. It's good for you. It's good for us. So if you want to share that, great. Thank you to our patrons who have been supporting the show. We will be in the Discord later. Probably not tonight. McMillan needs to go. I'm going to see if I can call it an early night, which is code for I'm going to be up fighting with the interface for 3 more hours. But we appreciate your support, and we look forward to catching up with you all tomorrow. Have a good night.
Take care.